Good afternoon and welcome to Uncensored on Western Standard. We are live on the floor of the UCP AGM here at Grey Eagle Casino. I'm your host, Bruce McAllister, and I'm joined as always by our two esteemed panelists. First, on my immediate right, Danielle Smith, the president of the Alberta Enterprise Group, former leader of the Wild Rose Party, and a common sense conservative commentator. Danielle, good to see you.
Good to see you, Bruce.
Rob Anderson, practicing litigator, former Airdrie MLA, and author of the Alberta Enterprise. No, the Free Alberta Strategy. Mix them up. Rob, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a long day and a long night. For those that haven't been here, we can tell you that the Premier just finished his speech. People behind us you may see having lunch now. Why don't we start on the Premier's speech? What did you think of it?
I loved about 45% of it. I think part of the problem that he has is that he's hitting all the right points. Like all of the great things he's doing with the economy, all of the business investment. If that was the kind of thing that moved votes, then I think he would be doing just fine. The problem is that he had to begin with the very contentious issue of how he's managed the COVID crisis. And this is a very divided room. And I didn't hear what he needed to say was something that would either win votes back from where they're landing with the NDP or win votes back from where they've drifted to the Wild Rose and other political parties. And I think that was a missed opportunity for him, quite frankly.
Maybe a reason for that. But before I follow up, Rob, your thoughts in general on the speech?
Kind of the same feeling. The Premier's doing quite well on some of the files. If you look at his work in on the education file, on the diversification file, they're doing well. The problem is the two biggest issues in Alberta right now obviously COVID's one, and closely behind that is Alberta sovereignty, our place in confederation. And he's utterly failing in those areas. And even in the speech today, his discussion about those two issues was extremely weak and defiant. And he just isn't getting it. So he can do well in those other areas, and that's great. Those are important files, but he's missing the point. He needs to address the elephants in the room, which are those two issues, which right now he's failing on.
Okay, what should he have done?
Well, I think there's a feeling out there that maybe it's time for a mea culpa. You say, look, I haven't done this. We've been obviously distracted by the COVID crisis and all those sorts of things, but it's time to turn the page and be strong on these issues, particularly the Alberta sovereignty and Alberta's place in confederation, and probably apologize for some of his indecisions with regards to dealing with COVID, back and the forth, and the flipping and the flopping and the demonizing of his base and so forth, and move forward. But he didn't do that.
Danielle, you've been on that stage, maybe not the one here at Grey Eagle, not as Premier, but certainly as leader of the official opposition in front of hundreds of people. You know what it's like to try and balance competing interests, and obviously he was trying to do that. So playing the devil's advocate, what would you have done differently? What would you have liked to see?
I felt like the room was really on his side.
Yeah.
Certainly when he got past the discussion about COVID, I think his real problem is we're heading into a fall respiratory virus season, and I don't think people trust that when he says we're going to do it this way, that he's going to stick with it. I think we've seen the flip-flopping, and I'll just give a prime example. In the past couple of days, we've seen that vaccines have been approved for age 5 to 11. And he initially said, we're not going to mandate that kids have to have vaccine to go to school. But you know what? Kids still have to be vaccinated to play sports and to be in band and to play soccer and to go to arenas. And I guess I'm thinking, so what's the rules going to be? Are we going to start having 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds banned from those kind of activities? I just don't know where he's going to go, because it seems like every time he comes out strong on an issue, he gets pushed back by mainstream media, he gets pushed back by docs, gets pushed back by teachers, then some kind of poll result comes out and he completely flips. And I think that's the problem that he's going to have, is that he can't quite get past that, because it doesn't sound like he thinks he's done anything wrong.
Okay, so I want to follow up on the policy debate and all those things, but because you raised it, COVID vaccines for kids. My fear, and the fear of a lot of parents, is right now you say they're not mandatory. What happens, Danielle, when the mainstream media, when the docs, when the NDP come out and say you should mandate these, and the pressure starts to build publicly? Will we see an about face and a flip-flop one?
This is what I'm worried about, is so much of what is happening around the vaccine policy is social pressure. And my own dear niece, she ended up getting vaccinated because she was getting taunted by her classmates. And I just don't want to see 6 and 7 and 8 and 9-year-olds feeling that kind of ostracism and bullying, because that lasts a lifetime. And for the comfort of adults, putting that on children who don't have the maturity to be able to handle that kind of pressure, it's not fair. It's not right, especially since we know now that we have had almost 2 years of experience with this virus. It is very clear most at risk is over the age of 70, multiple pre-existing conditions, especially those who are living in congregate care, either because they're in hospital or in nursing homes. There really is no reason to be putting that kind of pressure on kids. And that's what I'm worried about, is that the Premier has unfortunately demonstrated one too many times that whenever Rachel Notley takes the lead on an issue, manages to rally some public opinion behind her, then he ends up going the exact opposite direction. And it's exactly the opposite of what his members want to see him do.
I'm going to guess you'd probably say the same thing. This is one I think there'll be significant backlash in, though, if we do see a flip-flop.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The way that he'll be quick to say, the Premier will be quick to say that it's not mandatory, right? He'll say, no, you've got a choice. You've
Live television, folks.
You've got a choice. You're able to decide whether or not to get it, but you don't. You either get it or you lose your job. You either get it for your kids, or you don't. Your kids don't play sports, which I think is frankly abusive to children.
Yeah.
Like, that is part of their lives, and it shouldn't matter if you're living in Calgary and you can't play sports with your kid, or you live in an Airdrie and you can. I mean, it's just insane.
Let me ask you both to park this one. I think we could talk about this potential COVID policy, and we should mention maybe for a future episode of Uncensored. Let's have this discussion more in depth. And but I want to get back to the convention. It's like there's it's the United Conservative Party. It feels anything but united. Let's talk with the policy debate and the motion that came on the floor. First with you, Danielle, to increase from 22 to 29 the amount of constituency associations that have to vote for a leadership review. Didn't get enough support, but it did get 57% support.
It was I was here last night. It was quite strange to start off with a constitutional discussion in the evening when people were still trying to file through. I gathered there was a protest outside that prevented as many as 150 delegates from coming in. And because of just the way policies are voted on, that one needed a particularly high bar, 75%. It ended up getting 57%. And so it ended up failing just because of that. But that gives you some sense of where the room is at. To have 43% on a vote like that saying, no, we want to be able to keep with the rules, knowing that bar, I guess, has already been reached. There already are 22 presidents who want to call for an early leadership. It was quite clear that there was some pressure being put on to manipulate the membership into passing a higher bar, and the membership was having none of it. That's what I got the sense of last night, is they said, don't try to change the rules on us, because virtually every other policy after that failed. I got the real impression that because of the way that was handled, the membership just said, we're not going to trust any of these rule changes. And so they just voted them down. Okay,
so just again, if you're not clear, and I think you explained it very well, for the motion to pass, it needed 75% of the membership vote. It got 57. Still 57 was, if that's a vote if that's a leadership vote for the Premier, it's closing in on 60%. I mean, what did you think of the number?
Well, first of all, it's a stacked vote, right? So the Premier's, his people are paying for memberships, getting people out here in droves, and they still only got 7%. That's not good.
Isn't the other side doing the same thing?
They're not. The other side isn't as organized, and they don't have as much money at their disposal. There's just no way. But aside from that, I think there's this almost denial in the room that I'm seeing right now. I think there are some people in here, the Premier's people, that still think the man can win. And I'm telling you, I have, at this point, I don't see a way that he can win the next election. I don't see a path. And so it's very interesting, because you got a party here that's basically engineering its own self-destruction. That's what it feels like in the room. They are not going to win. They are going to lose with him at the helm. And I think that's the conversations in the hospitality suites. That's the conversations if you get people one-on-one. But when it comes to vote and everyone's got to stand and pay homage to the great leader and so forth, it's a really odd, dysfunctional tone here right now.
You know, and part of the reason for that is that The Premier gives a really good speech.
Yeah, he
I
does.
had the
And he did.
teleprompter right behind me, and I was turning around to see how much he was reading off of it. Very little.
Yeah,
He has
he
one
improvises.
bullet point, and then he just drives it home because he's a really smart guy, and he gets right into the details, and he can give a barn buster of a speech. And so I think people get the impression that that's going to be enough to rally support to win in the next election. The problem is, it's a big province, 4.4 million people. You can't cram all of them into a room like this. Not all of them are going to see a speech like that. And so they're going to make their judgment based on different things, based on what he does. And as Rob pointed out, especially for rural Alberta, the Free Alberta strategy, all the things that we need to do to assert Alberta sovereignty, he's not acted on that. And now these very, very divisive policies that we're still not past COVID. That's going to be a continued problem for him.
Okay, I'm going to try and play devil's advocate with some of this. So, if you're the Premier, I mean, you've got to say, when do the headlines start focusing on all of the positives that we're doing in Alberta? Jobs, 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 the economy taking off, all of the good things we're doing, instead of this self-destructing party debate. If what I'm trying to ask, I guess, if we gave the guy a break and started to report on the news of the day and not necessarily the forces that are trying to divide the party, would he stand a chance to pull this back together? I'll start with you.
I follow his Twitter feed, and I love it when he's tweeting about the latest business investment or some new job creation effort. I think that is when he's at his best. That's what he loves talking about. However, my observation is that people are prepared to take a risk on changing government when the economy is going well. It's sort of counterintuitive that politicians don't necessarily get the credit when things are going well. That's when people say, you know what, even the next guys couldn't screw this up because it's going so well. So in some ways, I think that actually plays to Rachel Notley's favor. I don't know that will be a barrier to people making that decision to go back to her in 2023.
Okay, pick up on that, but also this. Brian Jean is here, shaking hands and meeting delegates, and there's a guy waiting in the wings. I'll tell you what I'm hearing from a lot of people is that's not the answer. So, I mean, I don't know where you are on that, but touch on both of those questions.
Well, first of all, every failed leader always blames the media for not getting their positive message out. Okay, so that's not an excuse. He's the Premier. He has to generate support, and he's just done a poor job on a couple of key files, and that's just the way it is. So you can't complain, that the media is doing this and that. It's just, especially for a Conservative leader, that's life. Get used to it. But with regards to the other leadership candidates in the wings and so forth, I do think that that's a bit of concern for people. I think that they're saying, okay, who, if we get rid of him, who's going to be next and so forth. But again, that will take care of itself. There's always going to be someone that is going to step up, the right person at the right time. That is going to happen. So I'm curious to see if the caucus in particular, because I don't personally feel that the leadership vote is going to result in Kenny having to step down. I think that the only way this is going to work is if MLAs, 10 to 15 of them, go sit as independents and demand that he step down. And I think that's either going to happen in the spring or it's not. And if it doesn't, we're going to have an NDP government in 2023.
And Rob's being too modest because he would be one of the names that I think people would ask to step forward to put his name into the race.
As would you.
I would feel like if the position was open that I'd have to run, just because I believe in unity, and this is the real issue: is that let's throw some names on the table because there's some good cabinet ministers. I believe Jason Nixon has demonstrated that he's got leadership potential. Doug Schweitzer has demonstrated leadership potential. Leela Ahir is clearly interested. Rajan Sawhney is clearly interested. Casey Madhu, the Justice Minister, would be a good candidate. And then on the outside, those who were involved in Wild West politics: Rob Anderson, Bruce McAllister, maybe me, Brian Jean. They're talking about federal names: Michelle Rempel-Garner, Ronna Ambrose. Here's the point: if you had 10 strong leadership candidates, each selling 20,000 members to win, now you have a party of 200,000 people going into the next election. That is a force that can turn things around. And that's the kind of rejuvenation that happens with a party leadership. But if we continue on this path, I think you're going to see struggle in motivation, not only the fundraising numbers, but the membership numbers, the willingness of people to come out and door knock. And that's what lends itself to the NDP winning.
Okay. We're going to wrap in a couple of minutes, so why don't we go this way? Where do we go from here? Where does the UCP go from here, and what's next for the Premier?
Well, I think we're going to know in the spring, and I think that I'd be surprised. There'll be a leadership. He made that clear, at least in a speech. There's going to be a leadership. My guess is he will survive it. He's an excellent organizer, the Premier. Excellent organizer with regards to getting delegates out. That's his wheelhouse. He'll make sure he gets his over 50%, and I think that'll be good enough for him. And then it's up to the MLAs. At the end of the day, will 15 to 20 of his caucus have the guts to do what's necessary and do what, frankly, happened to Stockwell Day back in the day, where the 10 MPs went and sat citizen independence and asked the Premier to do the right thing. And if not, then I think 2023 is going to be a tough one.
The only other option would be that I think Brian Jean clearly wants to run for UCP leadership. I mean, he's as much an architect of unity as the Premier is. So I think that would be his first option. But clearly, if he doesn't get that chance, I think, believes that it's his job to break the bottleneck. And so I think you'd see him rebranding himself and the party under a brand new name, running 87 in 87 constituencies. And I think he'd have a pretty good chance of winning a lot of them in rural Alberta. That isn't a winning strategy for Calgary and Edmonton. So that road also probably leads to a Rachel Notley victory.
Well, we expected a lot of drama at this convention. I'm not sure that we've got all that we expected, but what I'm hearing is expected at the next one and over the next year.
Completely.
I'd say so.
All right, guys, thanks as always for your time.
Thank you.
Danielle Smith and Rob Anderson, Uncensored on the Western Standard, live from the floor of the Great Eagle Casino at the UCP AGM. We'll be back with more episodes of Uncensored on the Western Standard. Thanks for watching.